as a way to prove to the world that it could be done.
Yeah, so the mission was called Mars Oasis. It was seeds and dehydrated nutrient gel that would hydrate upon landing. You get this great picture of green plants on a red background. You're like first sort of life as we know it on Mars, and you can also learn a lot about what does it take to keep plants alive and have a little miniature greenhouse on surface of Mars. So that's what I initially pursued as like a way to basically increase NASA's budget. It wasn't let's create a space company. It was how do we get NASA's budget increased so we can go send people to Mars. And I was trying to figure out how to get this thing launched. And the rockets, the European and US rockets were too expensive, and I couldn't afford them. So I went to Russia to try to buy some ICBMs in 2001, literally. They kept raising the price on me, and it was being quite difficult. And I said, I could afford to pay like $9 million for an ICBM, but not 20, because I figured we need to do 2 of these missions because odds are good that one would fail, and then it could have a negative impact potentially. So that was pretty weird being in Moscow trying to buy ICBMs in 2001.
That's amazing.
How do you negotiate to buy an ICBM?
Yeah, I call up the military and say, well, they got to they got to get rid of these things anyway because of the arms reduction treaties. So it's like, if you're going to throw it away, I'll take it off your hands. They have to. It was like SS-18 Dnepr. It was the biggest nuclear missile in the Russian fleet, and but anyway, they're gonna decommission these things. So why not just sell me them instead? And then every time I talk to them, the price would go up, and I'm like, this is not good. Because so even if once we do a deal, we're probably going to get shafted afterwards too. And this is the pre-deal shafting. It's like, it's what's going to be after, or it's after I've given the money, then it's not going to be good. So, and then I started looking into it as like, why rockets cost so much, and so there's nothing fundamental about why they should cost so much. If you add up the materials and say, it's not like the raw materials cost that much. You really just need to figure out a smart way to get the materials in that shape. And then we need to make rockets reusable. So like any form of transport, if it's not reusable, it's extremely expensive. Mm-hmm. If cars were single use, and you need a round trip, if you bought a car for $20,000, then your round trip will cost you $40,000.
That's true. That's true.
No, it's crazy. So the same thing's true for aircraft and boats and rockets and everything. So the rockets were expensive even as expendable things, but then they were also not reusable. So there's no way we're going to have a city on Mars unless we can have reusable, low-cost, reliable rockets. That's fundamentally the issue. So I came to the conclusion that even if this Mars Oasis mission was successful, it would still not result in it would not materially further the goal of being a multi-planet species, because the rocket technology was not good enough, and it was not getting better. In fact, it was arguably getting worse. So the real thing that needed to be solved here is reusable rocketry and lowering the cost of access to space. And that's like, okay, well, I'm going to try to do that. So then I got SpaceX started in early 2002, basically. And I was living in Palo Alto at the time, but most of the engineering expertise was in Southern California. So that's why I moved to LA.
Did you ever have any, like, even inkling of imagination that you could be doing, a dozen launches a year and being contracted with NASA? Is that even like?
I thought that was I thought we had 10% chance of success or something like that.
You ended up being chief engineer, right?
Yeah.
Because like no one wanted to give up their secure jobs with ULA and something
No,
at the
yeah.
beginning.
Exactly. I actually tried to hire. Basically, there'd been a number of attempts at doing a sort of a private rocket company or commercial rocket company, and they're all failed effectively. And that's to the degree that it was like a joke in the aerospace industry. Like, how do you make a large fortune in the rocket? Start with a how do you make a small fortune in the rocket industry? Start with a large one. Pretty soon it's going to be small.
Business.
Yeah, they told me that joke so many times. I would just jump to the punchline, it was very hard to recruit people because I had not built any physical hardware before. And I kept being called internet guy for the longest time, for ages. Finally, I made for the first 10 years they calling me internet guy, or basically internet entrepreneur / fool. He's trying to start a rocket company. What an idiot! That was generally how it went. So it was quite hard to recruit people, and especially if somebody's got like a secure job at Boeing or Lockheed or something like that. Then trying to recruit them to be chief engineer of a startup rocket company was hopeless. So basically, nobody who was good was willing to join, and there was no point in hiring somebody who wasn't good. So I ended up being chief engineer, which is So the first 3 launches failed, and probably if I'd been better, then we would have gotten to orbit sooner. So it took me a while to learn all these things. So
From books or?
Books and talking to people.
Did you go to Utah and talk to anybody, like at ATK Orbital?
Oh yeah, I visited ATK. Yeah. Orbital is Dallas, Virginia. Yeah. So yeah, I visited ATK, visited Orbital. And Orbital had a success with the solid rocket based Pegasus. Mm-hmm. But they'd also gotten like an 8 launch deal from DARPA. So okay, if you're starting off with basically an 8 launch deal from DARPA, that's a good situation. We did not have a launch deal from anyone. And Pegasus is there's some clever engineering with Pegasus, but fundamentally, I think launching rockets from planes is not sensible. Yeah. It sounds like it would be a good idea, but it's not. And then even Orbital went away from doing that as soon as you get past a certain size, they went to ground launch.
Yeah, I was reading somewhere that ATK, Morton Thickall, they were doing snowcats, they were doing ski lifts, and they sold that to the man who made the DeLorean.
Really?
Yeah. I just read that in their Wikipedia. I'm like, oh, that's fascinating when I come around.
So, yeah. Right, so we got SpaceX going. And that was very difficult. We got the Falcon 1 rocket built. It was very simple. It's the simplest orbital rocket that's liquid fueled, so that it had the potential for reusability, for useful reusability. And then we had 3 failures. Finally got to orbit at the end of 2008. So
that was incredible. Going down to Kwajalein and watching.
Yeah, you wrote it like a blog for a while.
Yeah, I actually still have it up there. It's still, and it's an old blogging platform that Google still keeps alive. It's called quajrockets.blogspot.com.
I think it's going to get a lot of traffic soon.
Yeah, totally. Send it. Check it out. It's all there. It's photos and photos of there was one photo of Elon picking up a satellite. We launched the rocket, and the rocket exploded, which was very, very, very sad. Everyone's super sad. People were like pouring their heart and soul into the rocket. And the satellite was, I think, a U.S. Navy or
Air Force Academy.
Air Force Academy, and it was thrown out of the rocket and fell through the roof of the hangar.
Well, not this is like where you really think.
Barely a
Man,
hangar, exactly. It's like a stand-up tent.
and small tool shed.
Yeah.
Wasn't supposed to do that.
Like the size, maybe the size of this room. The rocket it had. This is the first launch failure, so it had there's a cracked aluminum B nut on that cracked during liftoff and created so the engine there was an engine fire. This wouldn't have been the end of the world, but there was one of the helium lines was steel mesh overwrapped with a Kevlar sleeve, and it melted the sleeve. And so we lost pressure, pneumatic pressure, which caused the engine valves to close. So about 30 seconds after liftoff, the engine shut itself off due to the engine fire, and then it went ballistic and basically smashed in the rocks just a couple hundred feet offshore, and when it was quite a big explosion actually. In that explosion, the satellite, which was in a fairing, went through the fairing on a ballistic arc back onto the island, smashed through the tool shed roof and onto the floor in a pretty reasonable condition. Like it wasn't totally gnarled.
Reuse it?
So we gave them back their satellite. so like, we didn't lose your satellite. It may need some repair. But it was so improbable that the satellite would come back. We had a couple more failures after that. 2008 was a particularly difficult year because we had the third failure in 2008. The Tesla financing round collapsed.
Oh, it was such a nightmare.
And I got divorced, and it was just
I think 2008 was
Bad year.
really, really bad. It was
yes.
a bad year.
Yeah, I don't think anyone could. I think 2018.
I think 2018 was worse.
What's up with 8?
Well, with the Model 3 ramp, right?
Oh, there were so many things that happened in 2018.
So much drama, it's insane.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Sorry, so we're in 2002, starting SpaceX, moved down to LA, and it was pretty fun in the beginning. Like generally, startups are pretty fun in the beginning, and then you go through the, chasm of doom.
Chasm of doom.
Yeah,
Trough of sorrow.
trough of sorrow. Exactly. It's rough.
Despair.
Yeah, it's usually always like everyone's like super optimistic and excited for first year or so, and then things start to go awry, and there's usually many years of grief before this finally day dawns. So it's like 2002, and then about in 2003 is when Rosen and JB Strawell called me up and said, "Hey, we want to have lunch." I want to say Harold Rosen. I think that's his name. But he weirdly had he was a pioneer in space technology and electric vehicles, which is odd crossover. And he'd done something called Rosen Motors, which was like sort of an electric vehicle company, and but he'd also been a pioneer in geostationary satellites. So he called me up and said, "Hey, let's have lunch." So we had like lunch at like Smith and Wollensky or something in El Segundo, where SpaceX started, and so Strauvel and Rosen were talking about space stuff, and then started talking about electric cars, and I said, oh yeah, so I was going to be working on electric car technology at Stanford, and then JV said, we should take a drive in the T0 from AC Propulsion. And I was like, yeah, because the timing is like lithium-ion batteries was really like the critical breakthrough needed for compelling electric cars. And so it's like, okay, I'll go try out their T0, which had specs similar to what we eventually brought to market as Tesla Roadster. So then so I got a ride in the T0, and then I tried to convince Al Cacconi and Tom Gage to commercialize the T0. Now the T0, and there's like lots of stuff online about it. It didn't have doors or a roof, so like clearly you need to add those things, or any safety systems, and it was very unreliable because it was just like sort of a proof of concept basically.
I heard it was basically like hand assembled. You guys really had trouble scaling it.
No, it literally didn't have doors or a roof, or any airbags, or an effective cooling system for the battery, and it was not safe, and it was very unreliable. It would break down. It needed to be babied by an engineer, or you couldn't use it. So, but nonetheless, it did get like 0 to 60, I think, under 4 seconds, 250-mile range.
It was enough to convince you that it was possible.
I mean, I knew it was possible because if you go from the energy density of lead acid to lithium ion, you've got about a 4x energy density improvement. So if you've got say a 60-mile range with lead acid, you're going to have about a 250-mile range with lithium ion with the same weight. But it was cool to see it in action with AC propulsion, and I tried hard to convince those guys. Like I really pestered them a lot to commercialize the T0, and they just did not want to do it. Weirdly, the thing they wanted to make was an electric Scion, and I'm like, you guys, nobody's gonna pay $70,000 for an electric Scion, okay? That was their idea, $70,000 for an electric Scion. I'm like, this is not gonna work, okay? You will sell like 14 of these things, and I'm like, I kid you not, I have like the email trails of these. Yeah, I mean, I think they're still around. So, in fact, but I even say, listen, even though I think this is the dumbest idea ever, I will fund 1/10 of it. If you can find 9 other people, and then I think the only other person they could find who would do it was Sergey Brin. So it's like, okay, Sergey and I are the only ones willing to do this, I think, and so they didn't actually get it off the ground. But and I said it's gonna fail, but at least it's something. And so then eventually I said, I'm like, listen, if you guys are not going to commercialize the T0, do you mind if I do it? And they're like, no, yeah, that'll be totally fine. Like, okay. So then it's like, okay, so I'm go do this with JV, and we'll go create a commercial version of the T0. And then